In December of 2008, Wall Street, the beating heart of global finance, stopped cold. Not because of the housing collapse, not because of the banks failing, but because of a man. A man so trusted, so respected, so untouchable, that no one believed he could be lying. Not his clients, not regulators, not even his own family. His name was Bernie Madoff. This is the story of the biggest financial fraud in human history. A $64 billion illusion that lasted for decades. A crime that destroyed lives, shattered trust, and rewrote the rules of modern finance. But before the scandal, before the fame, before the fall, there was a young man from Queens. A man with a dream. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was born in Queens, New York, in 1938, a time when America was still recovering from the Great Depression. His family was ordinary, middle-class, hardworking, no wealth, no privilege. Just the quiet grind of survival. As a boy, Bernie wasn't a genius. He wasn't the smartest kid in the room. But he had something far more powerful. The ability to make people trust him. He learned early that confidence could open doors. And charm could keep them open. In 1960, at just 22 years old, Bernie Madoff founded his own investment firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. No fancy office. No big investors. Just a young man, a small loan from his father-in-law, and an ocean of ambition. Madoff didn't start with blue-chip stocks or high-powered hedge funds. He started with penny stocks, obscure, low-value shares no major bank cared about. But Bernie saw opportunity where others saw scraps. He built relationships. He built a reputation. And within a few years, he wasn't just another broker. He was a rising star. As technology reshaped Wall Street, Bernie didn't just keep up. He stayed ahead. His firm became one of the first to use computers for trading. He embraced automation before automation became mainstream. By the late 1980s, Bernie Madoff had become a giant. A pioneer, a visionary. He helped build the Nasdaq Stock Exchange and eventually became its chairman. That title alone carried prestige. But what mattered more was the trust it generated. But while the world admired his public achievements, something far more secretive was happening behind the scenes. Tucked away inside the Madoff firm was a quiet little division, the investment advisory business. Barely advertised, rarely mentioned, and available only to those Bernie personally approved. To his clients, many of them friends, colleagues, celebrities, and lifelong neighbors, Bernie was not just a money manager. He was a genius, a miracle worker, a man who delivered steady, predictable returns year after year, no matter what the market did. And that should have been impossible. People weren't just investing with Madoff for the profits. They invested for the status. Being let in by Bernie was a badge of honor, an unspoken admission to an elite circle. He cultivated that exclusivity. He weaponized it. But behind the charm, behind the calm, steady returns, was the beginning of something dark. Something that would grow beyond his control. At some point, no one knows exactly when, Madoff stopped investing client money. He began pretending to invest it. Fake trades. Fake returns. Fake statements printed on old dot matrix printers in a locked room. And here's the most chilling part. The fraud wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't high-tech. It wasn't even clever. It was the most basic financial scam in the world. A Ponzi scheme. But unlike every Ponzi before it, this one had something no fraudster ever had. The complete trust of Wall Street. As word spread of his genius-level returns, money poured in. Millions became billions. Charities trusted him. Celebrities trusted him. International banks trusted him. Even sophisticated hedge funds, known as feeder funds, funneled their clients' money straight to Bernie. They collected fees. He collected the admiration. But the more money he took, the bigger the hole he dug. Each new investor wasn't a victory. It was a liability. In 2001, financial reporters published articles questioning Madoff's impossibly consistent performance. And one man, a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos, became obsessed with exposing him. He calculated the probabilities. He ran the numbers. He studied Madoff's strategy, and he reached a conclusion that would haunt him. It's a fraud. For 9 years, Markopoulos warned the Securities and Exchange Commission. He sent documents, spreadsheets, detailed mathematical proofs, and the SEC did nothing. They trusted Madoff's reputation more than the evidence. But no lie can last forever. And in 2008, the global financial crisis hit like a wrecking ball. Investors panicked. Banks demanded liquidity. Clients asked to withdraw billions. And for the first time in decades, Bernie Madoff had to face reality. There was no money. Not even close. On December 10th, 2008, Bernie gathered his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, in his Manhattan penthouse. What he told them would destroy their lives. The next morning, they reported their father to the FBI. Bernie Madoff was arrested on December 11th, 2008, and the world learned the truth. The financial icon, the NASDAQ chairman, the philanthropist, had run the largest Ponzi scheme in human history. When Bernie Madoff confessed to running a Ponzi scheme, the world was stunned. But few understood how he pulled it off. This was not a scam run from a basement, not a fly-by-night operation. It was engineered inside one of the most respected firms on Wall Street, hidden in plain sight, for nearly 40 years. Tonight, we go inside the machine. Bernie Madoff's headquarters sat in the Lipstick Building, a sleek, iconic tower in Midtown Manhattan. To the outside world, Madoff's operation was polished and transparent. Trading floors, computer systems, dozens of employees. But buried inside this respectable facade was a secret. The 17th floor. Few employees were allowed inside. There were no windows. No open trading desks. Just a handful of loyal staff and rows of outdated, dusty IBM machines. Those machines weren't for trading. They were for printing lies. At its core, the scheme was simple. When an investor put in money, Bernie didn't invest it. He deposited it into a single bank account at JP Morgan. Old investors were paid with new investors' money. As long as more came in than went out, the illusion lived. But to maintain the illusion, Bernie needed statements, proof of trades that never happened. The 17th floor staff manually created fake trade confirmations. Every line item, every stock symbol, every monthly gain, all fabricated. And astonishingly, no regulator ever cross-checked the trades with the stock market. Years of statements, billions of dollars, zero verification. Madoff claimed to use a strategy called the split strike conversion. It sounded sophisticated. It impressed clients. But there was one small problem. The strategy didn't generate the steady, uniform returns Madoff claimed. He promised consistent gains of 1%, 1.5%, 1.8% per month. Never too high, never too low. Smooth, predictable, mechanical. But to clients, it felt like a miracle. To anyone paying attention, it should have been a warning. By the 1990s, Bernie no longer needed to hunt for clients. Clients were delivered to him. These were known as feeder funds, massive hedge funds whose entire purpose was to funnel billions into Madoff's advisory business. They took fees from their clients. Bernie took the praise. And nobody asked questions. Some feeder funds invested 90% of their total assets with Madoff. That wasn't due diligence. It was worship. But feeder funds did more than supply money. They gave Madoff legitimacy, institutional respect, a shield against scrutiny. If billion-dollar hedge funds trusted him, why shouldn't everyone? Long before the scandal broke, the warning signs were everywhere. Sign 1. Impossible trading volumes. In many months, Madoff claimed to have traded more options than actually existed on the entire market. Sign 2. Always positive returns. Even during market crashes, 1987, 1994, the tech bust of 2000, Bernie made money. Sign 3. Tiny audit firm. A multi-billion-dollar empire was audited by a 3-person accounting shop, operating out of a strip mall. Sign 4. No independent custodian. Madoff held client funds, executed trades, reported results, all in-house. But no one wanted to believe the red flags. The profits were too tempting. The illusion too comforting. One man refused to look away. Harry Markopolos. For nearly a decade, he tried to expose Madoff. Harry's report to the SEC was blunt. He documented statistical impossibility, options volume mismatches, inconsistencies in Madoff's strategy, decades of flawless returns. He delivered his findings to the SEC. Once. Twice. Many times. But regulators were intimidated. Madoff was a legend. A former NASDAQ chairman. A Wall Street icon. The SEC didn't see a criminal. They saw a celebrity. Surprisingly, most employees at Madoff Securities had no idea a fraud was happening. They believed the firm's public business, the market-making operation, was the engine of success. Only a small inner circle knew the truth. Clerks, programmers, administrators, people loyal to Bernie, or dependent on him. Some were complicit. Some were unaware. Some suspected, but never asked. The structure ensured silence. The 17th floor was isolated. Its work was opaque. Bernie rarely allowed anyone near it. It was a bubble inside a bubble. A lie inside a lie. By the early 2000s, Bernie Madoff wasn't just successful. He was untouchable. Clients begged to invest. Banks courted him. Universities, charities, and retirement funds depended on him. Even foreign governments placed money in his care. On the surface, he was a symbol of stability in a volatile world. But beneath the calm, the machine was reaching its breaking point. The more money he took in, the harder it became to maintain the illusion. Every new dollar wasn't safety. It was debt. It was danger. It was collapse waiting to happen. By 2007, Madoff's empire was a ticking time bomb. And in 2008, when the financial world began to fall apart, that bomb finally detonated. But the story doesn't end with a confession. By the end of 2007, the financial world was cracking. By late 2008, it was imploding. But while Wall Street's giants were collapsing, Bernie Madoff's clients believed their money was safe. After all, Bernie always delivered. Always steady. Always positive. Until one day, he couldn't. The global financial crisis sent shockwaves through every market. Investors panicked. Banks demanded liquidity. Hedge funds scrambled to survive. For decades, Madoff's scheme had thrived because investors rarely withdrew money. But in late 2008, everything changed. Clients begged to pull billions out of their accounts. And for the first time in decades, Bernie didn't have the cash. His entire empire was built on the assumption that no one would call his bluff. Now, they were all calling at once. Madoff had only one option left: confess or run. He chose to confess. In November 2008, Bernie tried to raise money, not to invest but to keep the scheme afloat for a few more weeks. But no one had money to give. Not even his closest friends. On December 5, 2008, Bernie called his longtime accountant, Frank DePascali. Bernie whispered the words DePascali would never forget. On December 10, 2008, Bernie invited his two sons, Mark and Andrew, to his apartment. The room was silent as he spoke. It's all a lie. A giant Ponzi scheme. He admitted he'd been running it for years. Decades. Longer than they had been alive. Andrew started crying. Mark stood frozen, staring at the man he called Dad. Mark finally asked, "How long?" It was always like this. That night, the sons made a decision that would define the rest of their lives. They turned their father in. At 8:30 a.m. on December 11, 2008, Bernie Madoff was arrested in his Manhattan penthouse. He did not resist. He did not deny. He simply said, "I knew this day would come." The news exploded across every network on Earth. Bernard L. Madoff, the legendary investor, the NASDAQ chairman, the pillar of Wall Street, was a fraud. Not a small fraud. Not a clever fraud. The largest financial crime in human history. The collapse was immediate. Charities closed. Pension funds evaporated. Lifelong savings vanished. Some victims lost everything. Others lost more. Their will to continue. The ripple effects extended across continents. Banks in Europe, universities in America, families in South America, hedge funds in Switzerland. All had been feeding the machine, and now they faced ruin. When the FBI searched the 17th floor, they found mountains of paperwork but no trading activity. None. Not a single real trade for advisory clients had been executed since at least the early 1990s. The fraud wasn't sophisticated. It was astonishingly simple. A printer, fake statements, a single bank account, and blind trust. For decades, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies. Fraud, money laundering, perjury, theft, and more. When asked why he did it, Bernie gave a chilling response. It all started as a small lie, and it snowballed. Victims lined up in court to confront him. Some pleaded for justice. Some screamed in rage. Some broke down crying. One victim said, "You destroyed my life, Mr. Madoff. I hope you never see another sunrise." On June 29, 2009, the judge delivered the sentence. 150 years in federal prison. The maximum possible. The courtroom erupted in applause. Others wept. Justice had been served, but the wounds remained. While Bernie served his sentence, his family suffered a different fate. His wife, Ruth, became a pariah. Friends abandoned her. Strangers threatened her. But the greatest tragedy fell upon his sons. Mark Madoff, unable to escape the shame and scrutiny, took his own life on December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. He was 46. His young children were asleep in the next room. Andrew Madoff, who vehemently denied knowledge of the fraud, died of cancer in 2014. He believed the stress of the scandal accelerated his illness. The Madoff name had become synonymous with betrayal, a stain that touched everyone connected to it. Recovering the lost billions became one of the most complex financial investigations in history. Irving Picard, the court-appointed trustee, began clawing back funds from feeder funds, banks, and investors who had unknowingly profited from the scheme. It took years, hundreds of lawsuits, billions in settlements. But slowly the money returned. By 2023, victims had recovered over $14 billion, more than 70% of approved claims. An unprecedented recovery. But for many, it was too late. Savings were gone. Homes sold. Lives shattered. Money could not replace what Madoff had stolen most. Trust. Bernie Madoff died on April 14, 2021, in a federal prison medical center. He was 82. No family gathered at the prison gates. No crowds mourned. His legacy was not wealth, not philanthropy, not leadership. His legacy was a question. How could one man deceive the world for so long? The Madoff scandal forced regulators to overhaul how investment advisors are monitored. Stricter audits, greater transparency, better verification, more accountability. But beyond the laws, the story left something deeper. A warning. His fraud wasn't about numbers. It was about belief. People believed Bernie because they wanted to, because the truth was too uncomfortable to face. A truth as old as finance itself. If returns look too good to be true, they are. The story of Bernie Madoff is not just the story of a criminal. It is the story of a system that failed, a world blinded by reputation, and ordinary people who trusted too much. His empire was built on lies. But the lessons he left behind, those are very real.